You first. How would you decide? Well, I don't know.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Kent with Bent number 162, Kentil Soup and Word Salad. I am, of course, Dapper Dinosaur, and with me, as normal for Kent with Bent, by definition, sort of, is Benthovind.
Hi everybody, how are you?
Alright, and I have been reminded by Borg Emporia that FTFE, friend of the channel, and one of my players for Star Trek Endurance is in fact having a membership drive right now over on his channel. So if you want to torture him, feel free to go and buy him a couple gift memberships. And if you want to not torture me, but instead just help the channel out, feel free to get some for us. And also, remember, if we get fancy avatar number today, guess who wears a tutu a week from now? Bent, can you guess?
It would be me.
Well, yes. Yes, it would.
Yay.
Yeah, you already have the tutu.
Yes, I do.
All right. So, we are... Well, first, Bent, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Doing okay. See you've been enjoying some Oblivion Remastered. How's that going?
It was gifted to me by a good friend. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Nice. Very cool. Have you gone and fought Mehrunes Dagon yet?
I did, actually.
Wow.
I completed the main quest line.
So now what?
Pesky Oblivion gates. Now I'm working on the Mages Guild.
Okay.
Yeah.
What, you went with, was it Redguard?
Yes, I was my Redguard.
Okay.
Specializing in a longsword.
Ooh. Well, I have not been playing that. I have been playing some Rogue Trader, and some Factorio, and sometimes some Satisfactory, and also doing CGI stuff. So that's what I've been up to. If anyone in the chat has been playing any cool games, let us know, but we are not here primarily to talk about that. We are here primarily to talk about the dumbness of Kent Hovind. So... Oh, FTFE thanks me for the help. Well, he is welcome. Look, I don't think of YouTube as like a zero-sum game. I don't feel like helping Craig out is hurting this channel or anything like that. So, you know, I feel like it's more of a rising tide raises all ships or all boats or whatever kind of situation, right? So, I know that at extreme levels that's not entirely true because, you know, everyone, we're to some degree competing for similar audiences, and those audiences only have finite amounts of money. But I don't think we're close, either of us are close to tapping out that audience. So, yeah, we're here to talk about Kent Hovind. Now, Kent Hovind has recently been in, like the previous episode of this, was going over basically calcium concretions and confusing calcium concretions for petrification, which is an entirely different process with different chemistry that results in different kinds of things. Calcium concretion just leaves behind calcium compounds on the outside of structures, whereas permineralization actually replaces the original structure with minerals, leaving behind a mineral in the shape of the original structure, whereas calcium concretions are not, in fact, in the shape of the original, which you can see with this water wheel, where there's actually growths on the outside of it. It's not just shaped like exactly what the water wheel was, which is one of the reasons we know that this is a calcium concretion and not petrification. But Kent Hovind thinks that if he can show that calcium concretions happen relatively rapidly, that means that permineralization can happen relatively rapidly, which means that fossilization can happen relatively rapidly, which means that the Earth doesn't have to be very old because there are fossils in it. A whole lot of that doesn't make any sense, but we'll get into it more. But we do have some drinking rules, because this is a bit of a drinking game. So, first of all, I want to say, if you decide to play along with any kind of, you know, intoxicating substance, please do not then afterwards go out and drive, operate heavy machinery, fly an aircraft, text your ex. All of these are bad ideas. On the other hand, if you want to play along, you absolutely do not have to use any kind of intoxicating substance. If you want to play along with water, tea, juice, milk, coffee, soda, whatever, lemonade, it's fine, right? That's all good. If you want to play along without consuming anything, or if you want to play along with, I don't know, you take a chip and eat a chip, or like a bite of sandwich, I don't care. It's just for fun. You play however you want. I'm playing with, like, swigs of beer. Bent is playing with some Mountain Dew Baja Blast, I believe.
That is correct, yes.
So, you know, like, don't... The drinking part is entirely optional, and it's just for fun. So do not feel like it is some kind of a big deal. That being said, if you want me to get more and more drinks in, there are ways that you can do it, but we'll go over all the drink triggers, including the ones that you can cause as right now, basically. So first, if Kent Hovind says something so stupid that we just kind of have to drink in order to sort of like get some brain coolant going, then we'll take a drink for that. If Kent Hovind says something that's actually factually correct, that isn't just him quoting from something, right? It has to actually be something that's in his brain and then he says it, then we'll take a drink for that. If Kent Hovind mentions that political party, who was very, very successful, shall we say, in the 1930s and early 40s of Germany, or he mentions various famous members of that party, or their relatively infamous various war crimes, shall we say, we will take a drink for that. We will also take a drink if Kent Hovind mixes up anything we can know about Australopithecus afarensis, or just Australopithecus generally, or apes, or anything larger than that, larger than just Lucy the specimen. We'll take a drink. That can only happen once per stream, but it's called ad hominid. I don't think it's going to happen this time, but you never know. Also, if Kent Hovind cites a source, and we go ahead and check that source, and it turns out that the source not only fails to support him, which is always going to be the case, unless it's a creationist source, in which case I'm probably not going to bother checking it. But if it actively contradicts him, then we take a drink. Oddly enough, Kent Hovind's, we call that, by the way, Trojan source. Kent Hovind's Trojan sources are almost always the Bible, which is hilarious. Kent cites the Bible, and the Bible says almost exactly the opposite of what he's trying to make the Bible say, which is just amazing. Let's see. We will also take a drink if either Bent or I can successfully predict something Kent is about to say. We'll also take a drink if Kent Hovind tells a joke that doesn't land or a story that didn't happen. Now, that's a bit of a judgment call, but if it seems like something that should be on r/ and then everyone clapped, or r/ that happened, or anything like that, yeah, we'll take a drink for it. Can we guarantee that these stories aren't true? No. But there are also ways that you guys can get us to drink. Sorry about that. My Windows has to tell me that it's going to update soon. Thanks, Windows. You guys can cause us to drink by super chatting anything to the effect that AIG is a bag of dicks. We do have an emoji for that, by the way. Now that's answers in Genesis, and you do have to be a little clever, because if you just type in AIG is a bag of dicks, YouTube will censor it. They, however, do not generally censor that phrase in other languages, or if you cleverly disguise it well enough. So there you go. We will also take a drink for every single gifted membership up to the point where we have 30 or so, at which point I'm just going to finish this beer, grab another one, and add whatever the number of drinks is to the drink counter. We will also take a drink if anyone uses any of the Godzilla or Mothra emojis in a super chat or membership milestone chat. So that includes Mothra, Godzilla, and King Ghidorah, which we have just for channel members. Let's see, we will also take a drink if Mothra or Godzilla come by audibly, and what am I forgetting, Bent? Oh, Dapper is a professional. If I screw up the production, we will take a drink for that, but it has to be me. If it's just, the internet goes down, YouTube blows up, my computer starts on fire, that's not me. So, it's fine. All right. What am I missing, Bent?
That's all of them.
Well, there we go. All right, so, are you... All right, I'm going to ask you very carefully. Oh, wait, we have to drink for Mothra. Mothra's here. Drink for Mothra. Okay. But are you going to be more ready than you are now in the next 2 to 3 minutes?
No.
Okay. Well, in that case, Braille Gatubello for $2 says, AIG is a bag of dog knots and fur affinity is down. Oh, no. All right. Well, we will take a drink for that. Thank you very much. All right. So that is another drink there. Almost forgot to add it. And here we go. Bent, this might get really, really tiny because it's a really low-res video, and for some reason, Discord share likes to shrink down these videos for you. So,
Yes, it does.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Here we go. It didn't used to.
Right. This is about half, then, of a baby mammoth tooth. and it was coated with a varnish right away so it wouldn't crumble from oxygen getting to it.
Okay, cool. I don't know why he's showing people mammoth teeth, but he was doing it last time, and I have no idea what the point of it is. I mean, it's cool. I would like to have a mammoth tooth, but like, you know.
That's a gastric stone. Some dinosaurs would eat rocks in order to chew up their food, like chickens do, you know, have a crop.
But don't worry, guys, birds aren't dinosaurs. But also, that was correct, so let's take a drink for it. In fact, we've found some exceptionally well-preserved dinosaurs with the gastroliths, which is what he's talking about, still in the crop of the dinosaur, preserved in situ, where they were when the dinosaur died and was preserved, which is really, really cool. Because at first, you know, sorry, we'd find these gastroliths, and I was like, well, this looks like a gastrolith. Okay. But, like, how do you demonstrate that it's definitely a gastrolith? Well, you can't, really. But if you find a bunch of gastroliths right where a crop would be in a fossil, well, yeah, you can, right? It's sort of like with diet, right? You find a coprolite, right, which is fossilized dung. And it's like, oh, well, this coprolite looks like it could have come from, like, I don't know, an Edmontosaurus. Well, maybe. But if you actually find a Edmontosaurus well-preserved enough that it has gut contents, now you know for sure what it ate. Even if you inferred what it ate from a coprolite that you suspected came from Edmontosaurus. So, very cool paleontology stuff.
Dinosaurs did that, and those are often real smooth, rounded-off stones. No, that's not out here yet. Here on the screen, if you can see that, is a piece of petrified wood. This is a piece of petrified wood I'm holding in my hand. Let me explain the process of how it works. You can see one side's been cut and polished, and you can see the grain pattern, just like...
Flavius Josephus, the first century Jewish historian, for $5 says, I pled for 30 minutes... Wait. Oh, okay, sorry. I plead for a 30-minute later start time for Booty's academic babble due to it overlapping with my Hebrew class by 90 minutes. AIG is fallacious. You know what? That's close enough. We'll take a drink for it. You know what? You should DM me, whether it be on Blue Sky or Discord, because I might actually consider something like that, because I don't know how many people who would normally be watching that show are taking the Hebrew class, but I do know that some of them have a fair chance, because I have a pretty big overlap with the people who watch that show versus people who would take like that one of those online Hebrew classes offered by like Dr. Josh. So I will consult. So do actually send me a message about that, because that's a distinct possibility. I might actually do that. Rail Got to Bella for $5 says, the chick track that used Hovind as a source had a college professor parading around a human fossil in his hands that looked like a chicken bone. Yeah. That one was called, I believe, Big Daddy. And I know we read it on the channel. I think you were there, Ben, for that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was there for that one.
Yeah, that one was... It was pretty bad. Although I do actually think the Catholic Church started Islam chick tract was actually even worse. That one was just absolutely insane. Like, just all these crazy conspiracy theories about like the Pope and Muhammad and like Jesuits going down to create Islam hundreds of years before the Jesuit order was even founded. Like, it's just absolute nonsense. Which actually, I find that a lot of conspiracy theories about the Catholic Church do not seem to have much of an internal timeline of when the Catholic Church existed. Like, you'll hear things like, well, you know, the Catholic Church invented the globe shape of the earth. It's like, really? They did that thousands of years before Jesus, huh? Back before there could have ever been a Catholic Church? Okay, cool. It's like, yeah, the Jesuits, they're the ones who created the idea that Jesus is divine. It's like, okay, so the Jesuits were around hundreds of years before the Jesuit order was founded. Sure, cool. That makes lots of sense. So no. They weren't actually founded then. That's just when they became public. Why? Why did they suddenly decide to become public and announce that actually they were forming themselves? What does that mean? It's all just nonsense. And Kent does the same kind of stuff, right? Kent loves a good Catholic conspiracy theory because Kent is one of those very staunchly anti-Catholic Protestant types. Fits of mitochondrial Eve rage, oh no, for $2 says AIG is a forest of petrified wood. What do you think, Bennett? Is that good enough?
I like it, yeah.
All right, let's take a drink for it. All right, here we go. Let's hear more about petrified wood.
You know, a piece of wood you'd make furniture out of. I believe this is palm wood. No, this has got a grain to it. I don't remember. The guy who gave it to me, I put a label on it. It's someplace on the shelf. I'll have to get that.
Kenta actually is surprisingly right now about palm wood, and I'm going to take a drink for it. So, palm trees are not trees in the typical sense that you think of, right? So, most of the trees that you see out there are dicots, which are one of the two big groupings of flowering plants, right? The two big groups are dicots and monocots. Dicots are most of the things that you think of as flowering plants. So like oak trees, dandelions, all that stuff. Monocots are basically like grass and its close relatives. And palm trees are actually monocots. So palm trees are more closely related to your lawn grass than they are to any other like oak tree or something, right? Which is kind of weird to think about. And one of the ways that you can tell that they're very different is if you've ever seen a palm tree that's been cut in half or anything, it doesn't have the same kind of growth ring pattern with a wood grain in it because it doesn't have the same kind of growth pattern. And so Kent is actually right that if this were palm wood, it would not have the same kind of grain pattern that a regular like deciduous tree or something would have. So, yep. Bamboo. So Team ONB, woefully dogmatic, chronotastic centrism, jeez, that is a long name, says palm trees and bamboo are grasses. Yeah. To some extent, you know, exactly what counts as a grass can depend on exactly what situation you're in. But yeah, they're definitely monocots, and bamboo is much more closer related to grass than it is to anything else. And it basically is in part of a grass group. So yeah, that's another reason why bamboo also does not, despite forming like entire forests worth of bamboo, right, with big woody stems and everything, when you cut them open, they don't look at all like a tree in there. It looks like a hollow tube and everything. So like, yeah, plant systematics, cool stuff. And I'm surprised that Kent got that right. So, you know, that's actually legitimately like obscure plant knowledge that I wouldn't expect anyone in particular to know. And I'm very impressed that Kent knows it. So, you know, hey.
Type of wood it is. But basically, if you look at a piece of wood under microscope, each fiber of wood is made of millions of wood cells end to end, which plant cells have a hard shell, hard outer cell coating, and then the membrane inside.
He can't find cell wall though. Kent knows about the differences between regular tree wood and palm wood, but he doesn't know how to say cell wall. Why am I not surprised?
He was trying to find it, but he couldn't.
I know.
Yeah.
It's all right. Terrador's final form for 100 Argentinian peso says, credit where credit is due. If Trump actually becomes the new pope, like the Onion keeps saying, maybe Ellen White's conspiracies about Dominical law and persecution of Seventh-day Adventists will become true. Look, I'll just say this. I don't normally care, but I'm currently happy that Trump isn't Catholic. Because Trump as the Pope would be horrifying for all, what is it, like billion or so Catholic? How many Catholics are there? Someone find out for me. I want to know how many Catholics there are. Although I do love that basically the last thing that happened with the Pope was he tried to snub J.D. Vance. Then, like, J.D. Vance was apparently, like, too annoying, so he's like, all right, fine, I'll meet with you. And then he spent the entire time saying, like, hey, so there's this whole thing called mercy. And you gotta remember, J.D. Vance is a recent convert to Catholicism, right? So, like, imagine you just recently converted to an entirely new religion, and the head of that religion is like, no, I don't want to meet with this guy. And then when he finally agrees to meet with you, he's like, dude, you suck. And then he just dies. And basically his final official act on Earth was to tell you how much you suck. Like, wow. That would be, yeah, I don't know. Terrador's final form for another Argentinian peso says, you think bamboo and palm trees are related? Kent probably would say that. Yeah, but the answer is yes. I do. They are related. It's not even like a question. All right, here we go.
Right. Animal cells only have a membrane, and plant cells have a cell wall.
He got there.
Well, when it dies,
We're taking a drink. He got there. Good job, Kent. You did it. I'm so proud of you. I'm gonna cry.
the inside is going to rot and disappear. The fluid's going to drain out, leaving behind, like a piece of wood, when they dry it out, is, here's a piece of wood here. The fibers in the piece of wood, if you look at it under a magnifying glass or a microscope, are actually like long tubes.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they're vascular plants, Kent. That's how they get water going.
Because the ends fall out, and so this soaks minerals into it.
Well, it soaks water in, but the water usually has dissolved minerals, so yeah, okay, whatever.
Whatever you bury the wood in, it's going to absorb those particular minerals. If it's buried in iron-rich water or mud, it may take an iron texture to it. I've got petrified wood around here. I got all kinds of petrified wood. I should have got some of that out on the shelf, but I just got one piece. This is a piece of petrified wood, though, that's been chopped on. There are chop marks. Somebody was chopping this.
What is? He's not displaying anything.
With a hatchet. I would assume before it petrified.
That's not actually a great assumption. There are some historical accounts of people not realizing that the wood on the ground was petrified and then going at it with an axe and realizing, oh no. But also, people have also tried to chop up petrified wood to, take it with them. In fact, in the eastern part of Arizona, like the northeastern area, along the highway going to Albuquerque on the Arizona side, there's a part of the petrified forest that isn't actually on government land. And so there's a whole business of taking petrified wood and cutting it and turning it into things like tables or decorations or things like that. And you can actually go through and look at the businesses where they just have an entire area that's just chock full of cut petrified logs that they're going to turn into things. It's around Holbrook, Arizona, if you know where that is. They also have a lot of really colorful, if inaccurate and a bit simplified statues of dinosaurs. But weirdly enough, not very many from the area around Arizona. Pretty much all of them are from like Cretaceous, like South Dakota and Montana. Whereas Arizona basically has a few Triassic dinosaurs, and that's about it. Which is... I feel like the people of Holbrook don't actually know that much about the actual, like, fossil-bearing strata around them. And so they were just like, dinosaurs. So, like, T-Rex and Triceratops, right? It's like, no. We have none of those here. But that's okay. I don't really care. It's fine. It's fine.
And here it is, a piece of petrified firewood. Glenn French up in...
Well, it would be really cool if, you presented that piece of firewood that allegedly someone found with maybe like a picture, a source so we could look it up. But instead, what it is Kent Hovind just saying, well, someone found a piece of petrified wood with chop marks in it with no citation. So, given the track record of Kent's level of honesty, I'm going to say that when Kent Hovind says something, that means nothing unless he has something to back it up. So, yeah. He didn't even give us the guy's phone number. Normally, we at least get the guy's phone number.
Exactly.
Which is such a weird thing. It is so weird. I don't know if you guys know this, but normally when you cite a source, you don't include a phone number there. That's like just so weird.
Yeah.
New York, called me and said, Bill Hovind, I watched your seminar tapes, and he said, I have a pile of firewood in my backyard, or I think it was in his backyard, near his home. He said it was cut in the 1930s. You can still see the chainsaw marks, and it's all petrified. I think one of his neighbors had it, because when I called him a few months
Well, that would be interesting. But, like, is it true?
ago to say, man, I want a piece of that. We finally got our museum available, to put stuff in. He said, it's all gone. petrified firewood. I held a piece in my hand, though. A guy gave me a piece of petrified wood and said, "Well, Hovind, what is this?" I said, "That's petrified wood." He said, "Look at it close." It's still petrified wood. He said, "Look at
Oh, that was a joke that didn't land. Take a drink.
the ends of it." And when I looked at the end of it, you could see it had been chopped with a hatchet. You could see the chop marks from the axe on a piece of solid petrified wood. I held it in my hand.
I do not trust Kent Hovind's ability to actually identify tool marks on petrified wood. I just,
Me neither.
yeah, like, how would he know the difference between chop marks and then, like, a piece of wood that just fell over because the tree it was attached to broke? Or a piece of petrified wood that eroded out of a cliff face, fell, and cracked.
Yeah, there's no way he would know. He
Yeah.
hasn't been taught that.
I offered to buy it off him. He wouldn't sell it. I don't know where it is now. Here's a, this I found out just yesterday. This is actually mummified, not petrified.
Ooh,
A mummified dog in a tree.
sure is.
They brought this big log to
It's weird how it says petrified dog in a tree when in fact it is not a petrified dog in a tree. So if I remember correctly, the story here is that this is I think it's a redwood tree, and the dog was chasing something and ended up getting stuck in the tree and dying, but whatever the conditions were in that tree were such that it just kind of didn't completely rot away for quite a while, and then eventually it was found when the tree was chopped down, which, like, okay, I don't know why this is important, but, like, it's a relatively famous artifact that people know about. I just don't know why we care. Like, do you understand what the point of saying this is?
No, I don't.
Like, hey, someone found a decade-old dog corpse in a tree. Okay.
Yeah, what does that have to do with creation or evolution?
Yeah, I don't know, or fossilization or anything at all. It's like, yeah, this is true. This did happen, but, like, and
a sawmill in Georgia, in Rome, Georgia. American Forests magazine carried the article. If you can find me the original article, I'd love to get a picture of it. All I know is it's one of the past issues. I have no idea even what year, and it's on page 64. So if anybody watching this tape can get a hold of the American Forest magazine, please send it to me. David Royal from Rome, Georgia took the photo, and I called, and there's about 19 David Royals in Georgia, and I've called almost all of them. And there ain't none of them that I've talked to so far, so I'd love to meet him. But
he's probably dead.
they're bringing this huge truckload of logs to the sawmill to cut it up for wood. Inside one of them was a mummified dog.
Okay.
Apparently had chased a coon up the tree and got stuck. That's the best thing we can figure out. He's still there. But I just found out Marlissa chased it down yesterday. The dog, the log and the dog are in a...
I'm going to skip ahead. So I'm really tired of, like, random, hey guys, no source, but petrified thing. Yep. So this is once again, this is just another one. Petrified cowboy leg. It's not petrified. What you're actually looking at is bones with then some sediment after the flesh rotted away. One of the ways you can tell it's not petrified is because that leather is still leathery. And if there were a process that petrified the flesh, it would have also petrified the leather, which is also just skin, let's remember. So, no, this is not a petrified leg. This is someone who stepped into some kind of creek or something and died, and most of their body rotted away, but part of their leg, I don't know if they broke off. We don't know exactly whose foot this is, but there's no flesh in there. That's just sediment infill around bone, and it's not from long enough ago that you would expect the bone to rot away anyway. See what else we got. Nope, still talking about that. Let's see. Dug up this hammer in their yard a few weeks ago. Okay, so someone said a hammer looked like it was petrified. I don't really care.
Johnson, who has a petrified pin cushion.
Jeez.
Pin cushion was, this is an interesting story here. A 62-year-old widow in Sao Paulo, Brazil, didn't have the faintest idea what was causing the pain on the right side of her stomach. So she went to the doctor.
Yeah, this is a petrified fetus story. There is an actual condition where sometimes after a miscarriage, rather than passing the miscarriage, the body biomineralizes the body of the fetus. Okay, great. Biomineralization is not a process that happens out in the ground normally, because it's biomineralization, the thing where living things deposit what would otherwise be minerals. Your bones are an example of biominerals. Clamshells are another example of biominerals. Trilobite shells are an example of biomineralization. But insect and generally crustacean shells are not, because they're generally not made of minerals. They're made of chitin. So, yeah, I don't know what the point is.
He's saying they're not always found that way. Sometimes the complex are on the bottom. And if the fossils are out of order, according to the evolutionary thinking,
Ooh, hey,
the way it is, rock as a fetus was when it
All right.
died, nor
So we're backing up so we can actually get that whole story that he was just talking about, because that was a different topic. Because quite frankly, I am really tired of just going through a list of things that aren't permineralized, that Kent Hovind says are permineralized, or things for which we just have no evidence, or things that just are a different process entirely to fossilization. Like, I don't know if you know this, but the fossil record isn't just replete with a bunch of stone fetuses. Like, that's just not really a thing that is just all over the fossil record.
its sex. We should be able to determine these things when we remove the fetus surgically. It does appear, however, that the baby was about to be born when it died inside its mother's body. No date has been set for surgery. Petrified fetus inside the mother. Website www.s-t.com/daily/0496/04-05/96/z-people-htm. Don't know. Strange things found out there.
20 inches long and you didn't know you were pregnant?
I've seen some pretty big Mexican women that might...
Was that just casual racism?
A little bit.
Okay, I'm just gonna take a drink. I can't. Terrador's final form says it's cursed, but the plural form of fetus is fetus. You know what? The plural form of fetus is what people use as the plural form of fetus. So, there you go. Or maybe it should be feti.
Seen some big American women, too, that wouldn't know, you know.
Yeah, Ken. It's almost like the obesity rate in the United States is higher than it is in frickin' Mexico.
Who knows? Students are being taught now that each layer of the rock is a different age, the geologic column, which doesn't exist anywhere in the world, okay?
Okay. If I asked you to go out into nature and find me a periodic table in the ground, do it.
No.
Okay. Does that mean that the periodic table is useless?
No.
Does it mean that the things that it teaches us about, like, how chemistry works with periods of chemical or of atoms and columns and rows and all this, does that mean that that's all nonsense?
No, that's very sensical.
Okay. Did you know that the geologic column is much like the periodic table, a model designed to help you when you're doing actual in the real world research on rocks, much like the periodic table is a model designed to help you when you're doing chemistry out in the real world, even though it doesn't exist as a thing that you can just go touch. Yeah. So just like you can't go out in the real world and find a periodic table of elements just lying there with all the elements arranged in the proper order, it doesn't matter if you can find the geologic column. Because the geologic column is a model, right? It says, hey, we consistently find rock layers with these attributes in this order. Often many of them are missing, but they're never out of order after figuring out whether or not the up really is up. Because one thing that can happen, right, is sedimentary layers can be tilted or even thrust upside down, or there can be overthrusting. And so you do things like you look for evidence of overthrusting. You do things like look and say, okay, well, there's petrified footprints in this rock, but they're facing upside down, which means that this section of rock was probably flipped upside down. So, you know, in this case, down is probably later. And so once you correct for anything like that, you can find that there's always certain rock layers that come below other certain rock layers that have particular kinds of fauna and flora and whatnot in them. And that when you radiometrically date them, they tend to have consistent ages. And so the geological column, or more properly, the stratigraphic column, which is what you're likely to see in non-creationist sources, is just a model of every single possible layer that we've found and where it fits in the timeline, so that when you're working, find a layer, you can cross-reference with the geologic column or the stratigraphic column more properly, and then you can know roughly where you are. And you can do further work with stratigraphy to figure out more exactly what's going on here. And it's not a thing that is supposed to be a thing you can go touch. Now, that being said, there are a dozen or so places in the world that seem to have a little bit of sediment from basically every part of the stratigraphic column. I don't really care. It's an interesting thing that seems to be the case, but, like, whatever. Alright, we've got Team O&B's woefully dogmatic chronotastic centrism for $5 saying, let's see. I don't know what tune this is supposed to be to, but apparently it's supposed to be a tune. A petrified dog in the hole. Oh, okay. What is the tune for that? Like the bump on a log? You know the tune for that? I don't remember it.
Not by name, no.
Like a petrified dog in the hole on the log, in a log in the lumber mill, therefore God. AIG is a dirty duffel of damaged ding-dongs. We'll take a drink for that. Thank you very much. Alright, here we go.
And they're taught that the fossils tell you which era it's from. If you find reptiles, this is the age of reptiles. Or
no. Reptile as a group is not an index fossil. Okay. To be a good index fossil, you need two things. You need roughly global distribution, which means you can find this particular species, by the way, just about anywhere. And it also needs a short temporal range, which means, or a short vertical range, which means it's only from a very small slice of the stratigraphic column. You can't find it above or below that. But I know that you're not an expert on evolution.
No, I'm not.
But if you had to characterize how long it's been that reptiles have been around, would you say a really, really short amount of time or a long amount of time?
A long amount of time.
Okay. So since, by definition, in order to be a good index fossil, a taxon has to be around for a very short amount of time, do you think that anyone uses reptile as a whole as an index fossil?
I would imagine not.
Correct. Now, there are some reptiles that can be used as index fossils. For instance, aedosaurs are a pretty decent index fossil for certain parts of the Triassic, because in addition to having fairly wide distribution in cross-terrestrial environments, they also shed a lot of scutes, which then became fossilized, which meant we have a lot of aedosaur scutes, as opposed to aedosaur-like bones, which you don't have nearly as many of. And so that is a reptile that can be used as a index fossil for parts of the Triassic. But that's far from just saying, if you find a reptile, then you're in the age of reptile. No. Nope. Reptiles diverged before the Mesozoic, which is what people mean by the age of reptiles. And they persist to today. I saw a reptile earlier today. In fact, when I step outside, if I see vertebrates, there's a very good chance it's going to be a reptile. Much more so than mammals. Reptiles are the majority of the vertebrates I see outside. Other than humans, I suppose. I very rarely see a rat, or sometimes a rabbit, or a groundhog, and that's about it for mammals. I, on the other hand, see doves, hummingbirds, hawks, flycatchers, chuckwallas, whiptails, collared lizards, zebra-tail lizards, western-banded geckos, all the time. All of these are reptiles. So, yeah. And Bent can't identify most of them because he doesn't care about nature.
That's kind of true.
The first part, at least, is true.
The first part's pretty true, yeah.
Yeah. Ben's like, I saw a lizard. I'm like, what kind? I don't know. Darn
I
it,
just
Ben.
told you, lizard.
Lizard. They're all the same. They're just lizards. We do have some other skinks around. We have some skinks around here, but I don't see them very much. Almost always juvenile chuckwallas. I very rarely see a big old chuckwalla. Collared lizards and whiptails. The western-banded geckos and the zebra-tail lizard much less frequent. Although, so here's a weird thing. The majority of western-banded geckos that I've seen are in the house, because when they hatch, they love to come inside the house as little tiny babies, and because they're nocturnal, I almost never see them outside, right? So I've seen, I think, 5 or 6 western-banded geckos, and I think all but one of them was actually in the house, and then I caught it and put it outside. So, yeah. It's like finding a spider in the house, you know? They get in. It's a thing. Team ONB's Woefully Dogmatic Chronotastic Centrism for $5 says, I'm a model, you know what I mean? And I do all my science in the textbook. In the textbook, I do all my science in the textbook. Ghidorah, and we'll take a drink. And then My Unfinished Journey for $2.22 says, Hail Nero, Daps, Bent, and Index Fossils. Indeed. Roshina hashtag upset Keller for $1.99 says, Dapper is just a big lizard too. That is incorrect. I am a reptile, but I am in fact not a lizard. I am a dinosaur. Dinosaurs are part of Archosauria, the basically sister group to Lepidosauria, which includes lizards, rhynchocephalians, choristoderans. It includes what is it? Sarcopterygians? Yep, Sarcopterygians. So yeah, it's a big group, but like it doesn't include me.
If it's in fish, this is the fish.
Oh, I see snakes sometimes too. Those are also lizards. They're also reptiles. Toreador's final form for 100 Argentinian peso says, you can't complain about Roshina's comment. A lizard is whatever people say a lizard is. My descriptivism strikes again against me. All right.
That's good.
I hate this. Dutchman that never saw a snow tunicate for $2 says, most animal sounds I hear are reptiles. Really? Reptiles are usually not all that loud. I guess, well, then again, birds are pretty loud. And I guess, yeah, most of the animal sounds I hear are birds. So yeah, I guess that's true. Most of the animal sounds I hear are either birds or insects. Huh. Never really thought about it. I think I hear bird sounds a little bit more frequently. Especially since I started laying out traps for crickets. There were times before I got traps where I would record at night, and I would actually have to find what the exact frequency of cricket chirps are, so I could go in to Audacity and suppress that one very specific frequency to erase the cricket noises. I'd just be like, no, this frequency doesn't exist. Just get rid of it.
Nice.
Yeah, it was. The way I did that ultimately was like I recorded a whole bunch of like just empty noise, just room tone, and I went and looked at like the frequency chart to see what the peak was, because the cricket was obviously the loudest part of the room tone. I was like, aha, I have you now. Now I know exactly which frequencies to suppress in the later audio. But then again, I started leaving out glue traps, and yeah, that's been working. I also once caught a pack mouse on a glue trap. Unpleasant, but it was less unpleasant than just having a live door or pack rat just living in the house. I heard it chittering. I didn't like it.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Fish age, you know, or the chalk age, Cretaceous. That's what all these words are.
Yeah, good job, Kent. You figured out the etymology of Cretaceous. I guess we'll take a drink for it. Sapphire Magical Wolf Paws Light member for 35 months and at the amnio level says, most of the animal sounds I hear in a day are from monkeys. Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good point too. Like, if I don't discount humans, which I was, are most of the animal sounds I hear from monkeys? I don't know. Definitely a lot. I also hear dog sounds a lot, though.
That's true.
I now wonder, what animals do I actually hear the most? Is it reptiles or is it mammals? Because, I mean, humans and dogs count, and I wasn't counting them. I was only counting wild animals. Huh. That is an intriguing question. I wonder if there's a way to find out without me just recording an entire day worth of audio and then sitting there for days analyzing it, which I don't want to do.
Mm-mm.
Cretaceous and all that kind of stuff. The layers, first of all, the fossils are not well sorted like the textbook teaches.
I mean, they are, but I'm sure Kent will have some counterexamples, complete with citations to the papers describing all these unordered fossil layers, right? Like, he would be able to back this up, this wild claim, right? Yeah, because that's a pretty crazy claim. You better have some good evidence.
By the time it ends up in your textbook, they show, all the dinosaurs in one layer. Well, that's just...
Well, no. Dinosaurs start in the Triassic, they continue into the Jurassic, into the Cretaceous, into the Paleocene, into the Miocene, into the Eocene, right up to today. That's a lot of layers. And each of those are divided up, right? Like, the Jurassic is composed of multiple stages. In fact, I don't have an internal map of the stages. So let's see. Let's see if we can find all the actual stages. Nope, that's way too small. I see the thing that I'm kind of looking for, and it's like, oh, this is 800 by 800 pixels. And I'm like, that's illegibly small. That is ridiculous. What are we doing here? All right, so let's see. So, for the Mesozoic, we have, if we're going by stages, right? Stages/ages. And remember, each stage/age is itself composed of multiple layers called members in each formation, and each stage is also composed of multiple formations. So this isn't even close to all of the layers. So just for the Mesozoic, the parts that Kent might call the Age of Reptiles, we've got the Induan, the Olenekian, the Anisian, the Lendinian, the Carnian, the Norian, the Radian, the Hetangian, the Sinemurian, the Pilinbachian, Torcarian, Elenian, Bohoikian, I think, Bathonian, Pelovian, Oxfordian, Himerigian, Bariacean. This is a hard word to say. Bariacean, Valanginian, there we go. Otruvian, Baremian, Aptian, Albian, Cenomanian, Turonian, Coniacian, Antonian, Campanian, and Maastrichtian. You can tell which ones are actually found around the United States by which ones I can actually say at the drop of a hat. Because the other ones I'm not as familiar with because we don't have them. So,
you mentioned 29 different ones.
Yeah, and that's just the stages, which are themselves composed of multiple layers. So, Dr. Dino for $2 says, what's the fake Dr. D lying about tonight? Well, first it was about whether or not mineralization is the same thing as calcium concretions. Now, he's basically just lying about the stratigraphic column broadly. Just all of it. Just the whole thing.
Just flatten out the way it is, okay? But even if it were, that wouldn't prove anything. This David Ropp, who's a curator at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, a strong believer in evolution, by the way, Ropp says, one of the ironies of the creation-evolution debate is that the creationists have accepted the mistaken notion that the fossil's record shows a detailed and orderly progression. Here's an evolutionist admitting the...
This is a weird thing. Let's look this one up, right? One of the ironies of the evolution-creation debate is that the creationists have accepted the mistaken. That should be enough. And this is Rope. Raup. I don't know. I don't know how to say that name. If you have that name, let me know how you say it. Let's see. Can we find this from a non-creationist source? Let's see. First one, creationist source. Second, creationist source. Third one, creationist wiki. Another creationist source. Fourth, another creationist source. Let's see. Then we get to a Google Docs that slides. Creationist source. Creationist source. Oh, creationist source. Creationist source. Creationist source. Creationist source. Actual Kent Hovind is the next source there. Creationist source from British Israelists. The people who think that the real Hebrews, the real Israelites, are actually the British people. Yeah, okay. Creationist source. Creationist source, and creationist source. And that's literally all of the links that I can find on the internet. I don't know if this is even a real quote, because literally the only place I can find it online is creationist sources. So, yeah. I don't even know what to do with this. I can't even find it in anything other than creation sources. And here's the thing, right? Creationists have published and then revised a creationist quote book, which was literally just a collection of quote mines curated by an Australian creationist and then widely used by creationists. That's the level of dishonesty that we have when it comes to quotes from creationists. So I have absolutely no idea what to do with this, because I feel like if this is true, there's more to what Mr. Rope, Dr. Rope, I'm not really sure, had to say. But literally all I get beyond the stupid AI summary, which is meaningless, is just 2 pages of creationist sources. So, like, I don't even know. If anyone has this source, please let me know. Like, if you have a way to, like, access, I don't know, like the Science Archives or something from 1981, it probably isn't even in any of their online archives.
Fossil record does not show an orderly progression from simple to complex. So what
Okay, well, that part is sort of true, right? There's one of the common misconceptions about evolution is that it has a drive towards complexity, but that's not really true. Instead, there's no particular direction of complexity. However, it is likely that life started at about as simple as life could be, which means that on net, the only way you could really go is towards further complexity. But you can kind of think about it like this, right? If, let's say you have a swimming pool, right? Whole big ass swimming pool. And you're going to start by suspending a little drip feed over it of food dye, right? We'll just pick blue, say. Now, when the food dye drops into this, and we'll say that the pool has been laying steady still for a few days, so the water is very calm. When the food dye drops in, it's going to spread out in all directions, right? And you can say there's no particular directional bias. And it's going in the middle, so it's going to hit basically all the parts of the pool at about the same size. And we'll say that, just for the sake of argument, rather than being a normal electric swimming pool shape, it's a perfect circle, right? Okay, cool. So that way, like, the dye will hit one edge at about the same time it'll hit the other edge, because diffusion doesn't really have a preferred direction. It's all a result of, like, Brownian motion and statistics and stuff like that, right? Okay, cool. But let's say we have a second pool that's identical, and we also are going to drop food dye into it, except we're going to drop it at the far western edge. It's going to look like there's a directional bias in the food coloring, where the food coloring spreads east more than it spreads west, right? Because the overall motion is going to tend to be towards the east. It's not going to spread towards the west since it's already at the western edge. But that's an illusion, right? It's an illusion of where the starting point is. There's not an actual westward bias in this diffusion. It's just that that's where you're dropping the thing. Evolution is basically the same kind of thing when it comes to complexity. If you start at the lower bound of complexity for life, there's really only one way to go, right? It's towards more complexity. But that ignores the fact that we have complex organisms which have become more simple over time. One of my favorite examples is Myxozoans. Myxozoans are cnidarians. That's the same kingdom as, like, jellyfish and corals, which are not the most complex animals, but, like, they have nervous systems, they have eyes, they have specialized stinging cells, they have muscles, they have digestive systems and digestive enzymes and all this stuff, right? They have all the animal stuff. But Myxozoans are cnidarians that are so radically simplified that they usually have an amount of cells that you can count without running out of fingers. They don't have any real cell types, really. I think they still have, like, somatic and reproductive cells, and that's about it as far as cell types go. They don't even have mitochondria. Some of them. Some of them have lost their mitochondria. That's how simplified they are. But they're still cnidarians. They're still animals. There are single-celled animals out there. Canine transmissible venereal tumor, which is a transmissible cancer that is basically a single-celled dog. That's radically simplified. Things can go simple, But again, when you start against that wall of minimal complexity for the starting point of evolution, you're going to over time end up pushing that average complexity towards more complex. So yeah, it's much more complicated than just like, well, things get more complex over time. Now, there are certain aspects of evolution that do increase complexity under some measurements, right? So as a result of things like genetic drift actually tends to complicate things, but not in an adaptive way. Genetic drift is why we get ridiculous Rube Goldberg-y things like the mammalian blood clotting cascade. Because it still works, and it's not really detrimental, but it just piles on additional proteins that you don't really need. There are animals with much simpler blood clotting mechanisms than mammals that do just fine, and you can actually knock out a bunch of the parts of the mammalian blood clotting cascade and actually still get blood clots in mammals. So we don't actually need this absurdly complex blood clotting cascade, but it does occur. And so if we take into account genetic drift, then we can say that there is a bit of a push towards complexity in that sense. But if selection is going to favor simplicity, you can simplify just as easily as you can complexify. So, yeah. And there goes my browser running out of memory only on YouTube. It only ever happens on YouTube. There's only 2 places it ever happens. YouTube Studio, and every once in a while, if I'm watching a live stream that I'm behind on, it will happen. Only time. I don't know why. It doesn't just happen to me. I've seen it happen to Toon a few times too.
It happens to me.
Yeah. Let's see. I have to double check where I am. Terrador's final form for 200 Argentinian peso says, what I love about the canine transmissible venereal tumor is that in a recentish debate, Kent said that a multicellular organism turning into a single-cell organism would be a change in kinds. I remember that. And then he just staunchly denied that this counted. Why? I don't know. And it's also not the only transmissible cancer that is the descendant of a multicellular organism that is now a single-cell parasite in closely related organisms. Tasmanian tigers have a facial tumor disease that is basically the same thing. It's transmissible to cancer. And they get it because Tasmanian devils engage in group feeding behaviors, where once one of them starts eating something, a whole bunch of other ones will come and start eating. And then, in addition to the fact that they start with the tenderest parts of the animal first, which means they're often sticking their entire face into cavities of the organism, which is going to leave behind trace cells from the tumors. They also will sometimes get into fights, and the way that they fight, like most carnivorans, like most carnivorous mammals, I should say, they're not actually carnivorans in the taxonomic sense, is, they bite at each other. And when you have a facial tumor, and you bite at something, guess where that tumor cell is going? Yeah, your face. And it's actually a really big problem, and it has caused huge declines in the population, and they're actually currently evolving a shorter life cycle to deal with the fact that they usually only live long enough to breed about once. So their litter sizes are increasing, and the age at which they reach sexual maturity is decreasing to deal with the fact that their lifespan has been radically shortened by dealing with this transmissible cancer, which is, again, a single-celled Tasmanian devil that is infecting, as a parasite, other Tasmanian devils. Not just dogs. That's crazy. Yeah, exactly. In fact, it's actually getting to the point where there are some populations of Tasmanian devils where it's hard to find one that doesn't have facial tumors as an adult.
Goodness.
Yeah. They, like I said, they are evolving to adapt to it. So it's unlikely there's going to be like an existential crisis for them in the long run, but like it's a big deal.
Creationists have done, they have said, well, the fossil record is simple on the bottom and complex on the top, and we can explain how it happened. I think we can explain how it happened, and I will in a moment. But he's saying they're not always found that way.
By the way, I do want to say one thing. If you decide to look into the thing with the Tasmanian devils, it's gruesome and grotesque, and if you are not ready for pictures of some really gross stuff, I would recommend that you not look into it very much. So be prepared for that, and maybe don't be about to eat lunch when you decide to look into this. This is a post-lunch thing to look into, not a pre-lunch thing. It's not pretty. But hey, you know what? Let's take a quick break, and afterwards we will come right back. We'll give us a chance to freshen up our drinks, maybe use the head if we need to, and in the meantime, y'all can enjoy the teaser trailer for the next episode of Star Trek Endurance, which is called Doomed to Repeat the Past. So we're going to be out of here and enjoy that. And then afterwards, if we're still at break, we'll start in with the musical stylings of one Beethoven, which is you.
Well, that's me.
We'll be right back. Next time on Star Trek Endurance.
Captain's log, stardate 60003.9. The Kanzi has been ordered to divert course and rendezvous with an unregistered Federation craft in orbit of a Klingon colony world, and to expect a squadron of Klingon Defense Force to also be in orbit, possibly from the Kuvha, dishonored Klingon warriors striving to regain their honor. Starfleet has been very quiet about exactly what is going on, but we've been picking up civilian broadcasts from our destination talking about a plague and a widespread mental illness across the entire population. Starfleet has a long history of providing aid to worlds suffering from new illnesses, so there must be something else going on here that I'm not cleared for.
Hoofdpoog, Jav, Par, Wedge, Goed. Roop Betlingan, Judge Poetveit, Arch Mooj. Dag Rob up the Vornish, Rob the Hochtour, Vaj Rob up to Lupet. Kopdak, Cage, we Hostag. Pat de Vittuge to Loop at the Kube. Betchach at the Tool.
With neither the Klingon High Council nor Starfleet Command willing to talk about this situation, it is clear that whatever is going on is no ordinary plague. The presence of an unregistered but clearly Starfleet ship only deepens the mystery further. The crew will have to work quickly to avoid both a potential interstellar pandemic as well as a diplomatic disaster, all while disgraced Klingons threaten them and their survivors on the planet. Can the crew cure the plague before the planet is sterilized from orbit? Will they discover what's really going on? Find out next time on Star Trek Endurance. And we are back. Welcome back, Bent.
Thanks, it's good to be back.
All right, so now that we are back, real quick, we have the after the break little announcement bit, which is to say that this channel is almost entirely supported directly by the generosity of the viewers, which is you guys, which means things like super chats, memberships, the Patreon, gifted memberships, super thanks, super stickers, buying merch. That is how this channel stays afloat. And only in the last few weeks has the algorithm been giving me any love after several months of rough going from the algorithm. You can tell when it's the algorithm. For instance, if, say, a video has a really good click-through rate, but a really low view count, you know what that means? That means that a high percentage of the people who see the video click on it, but YouTube just isn't showing the video to many people. And that's been the case for a lot of videos lately. Which is a little rough, which means that even more than normal, I have to rely on your generosity. So, if you are currently not supporting the channel financially, but you have the means to do so, and you are enjoying this channel and you want to see it keep going, in addition to super chatting and that, which I greatly appreciate, as well as gifting memberships, which I also super greatly appreciate. There's also getting yourself a membership, as well as the Patreon. The Patreon starts at $1 a month. The memberships start at $1.99 a month. You can get a 50% discount if you go annual on the Patreon. They both get you access to the Discord server that's just for supporters. They both get you early access to my scripted videos, which I think the last time I did a scripted video, it was like from 8 months in the past. So there's like 8 months or something worth of scripted videos that you could just watch right now. So yeah, it's a pretty good deal, I think. I try to make it a really attractive offer. But if an annual or a monthly pledge isn't your thing, again, super chatting is always an option. But if you can't afford that or you just want a little bit more, there's also the merch store. Bent also has a Patreon. We also both have linked in the description Amazon wish lists, which
It's true.
I mean, there's all sorts of stuff on there. There's stuff from like quick entertainment stuff for me, all the way to like staple food stuff if you want to make groceries a little bit easier, especially lately since I'm expecting grocery prices to start shooting up like crazy. All of those are great options. There's a merch store. You can actually see merch down below this video, and if none of that strikes your fancy, click through the actual full merch store page, and there's other designs and other items that aren't even listed on the merch shelf because, well, we don't have room on the merch shelf for everything I have on the merch store. So yeah. But then again, I do want to emphasize, if you cannot afford to support the channel, please do not do so. I do not want any of the money that you would be spending on your groceries or the mortgage on your apartment or your kids' orphanage bills. None of that none of that money should be spent on me. Oh yes, and sheep it. Borg Emporia has just reminded me. Yes. So another important thing is that the way that I get videos animated is with a render farm called Sheepit, which is a free distributed render farm. The way it works is when I need things rendered, and other people are assigned my frames based on how many points I have. The more points I have, the higher my priority my frames are. And each frame someone else renders for me costs me points. The way I get points is by rendering frames, either my own frames, in which case I only get 10% of the normal points, or rendering other people's frames. But other people can render on my behalf, and there are instructions in the description. You go to the part that says how to render for me, you follow the link, you download the client, and then there's login information for my account with a key instead of the actual password. The key will tell Sheepit that when you put that key in, you are rendering for me, but it does not give you access to like do weird things with my account. So you can't upload your own frames, you can't delete my projects, you can't delete my entire account, things like that. So let's see, we got a few things to read here. Polyhashes Cracker, I think. Hashes Cracker? I'm not positive. For $5 says, on the Star Trek Endurance clip, I really wanted to hear Exterminatus. Well, okay, small spoiler. If the players do poorly enough, we might get the Star Trek equivalent of Exterminatus. And do you know about Exterminatus?
I don't think so.
Ben, we got to get you into some more 40k stuff. I don't know how you managed to get through like the Navy without reading more 40k novels.
It was easy. I just read a bunch of Stephen King books.
Yeah, but there were 40k novels just floating around birthing all the time.
There were Stephen King novels floating around birthing all the time.
All right. We're going to have to teach you something
The
about
whole
40k.
Dark Tower series. It's really good.
All right. Maybe, you know what? Maybe our next super chat goal can be, we probably won't, not today, but like maybe it can be like, hey, if we get enough crazy number of super chats, then Bent has to like, I don't know, like read a short story from 40k or something.
Maybe I'll consent to that.
Maybe.
Depends on how short the story is.
I mean, there are some really short stories set in 40k. I mean, I've read stories that were less than a page long.
Yeah, I would do that.
I might want
That would be
something.
more than a page, but
I would say more like 4 or 5 pages would probably be a amount.
yeah, I could do that.
All right, Joshua Geese also gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships and said for $2 and sheep it for rendering. So thank you very much for reminding me, as did Borg Emporia. So let's get those 5 drinks in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Thank you very much. All right, here we go.
Sometimes the complex are on the bottom. And if the fossil
So that's part of this that isn't true. So the lowest fossils are stromatolites. And so what a stromatolite is, it's basically a tower made of dead bacteria. The way this works is, so bacteria have cell walls, similar to how plants have. Oh, Polly has his cracker. You can call me Polly, says Polly has his cracker for $5. Okay, that makes sense. I was definitely putting the HASHIS as a single word, and I was like, I don't know that word. Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much. I will try to remember that. I do have a lot of people who super chat, so I may forget if I do. You don't have to super chat to correct me, but you can just tag me, and that's anyway. Okay, so stromatolites, right? And these still grow. There's an especially famous part of Australia that has some stromatolites that are relatively large and still growing. So these are photosynthetic bacteria, right? And bacteria, similar to plants, have a cell wall, although it's not chemically the exact same thing. Doesn't really matter. It's still a hard, relatively slow to rot, if it rots at all, coating around the cell membrane. So these bacteria are photosynthetic, and so they grow and reproduce in a little mound. But as new generations happen, they have to go up, which means that any of them that die spray down like their cell walls below the newer generations, because the newer generations have to get to the top of this mound if they want to photosynthesize. Because if they're at the bottom, well, that's how they die, because you can't photosynthesize if you don't get light. And so over time, this grows a sort of like bulbous column. It usually has a rounded top, and it's not really like mushroom shaped, although it does tend to have a bit of a taper. But anyway, you can tell which direction it grew, because if you cut it open, like slice it down the middle, you can actually see like growth, not rings, but arcs, right? Because the top is always sort of bulbous shaped. You can see these growth arcs, and you can tell which way is up, which way is down. You can tell things like there are seasonal cycles in them, so you can see like how many years this thing was growing, stuff like that, right? And so these are the oldest fossils that we have, as far as like macroscopic life. And it's not even macroscopic in the sense that the organisms are microscopic, it's that they form a macroscopic structure. Those are our oldest really obvious fossils that we can find. And there is nothing more complex at those layers. We don't have any fossils of like cnidarians or even sponges or even multicellular plants or anything like, or algae or anything like that, right? It's just a bunch of bacteria. So when Ken says the complex things are found at the bottom, he's not telling you the truth. I can't say whether he knows better, because Kent is obviously an idiot, but he's also dishonest. So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know if he's just lying to you or if he's just dumb. He's certainly dumb. But yeah, he might not know better, but he is in fact wrong. It would be interesting if we found anything that old down there, but we haven't.
fossils are out of order, according to the evolutionary thinking, they've got a whole list of things they can call on to explain why they're out of order.
So, okay. This is kind of a weird thing, because there's two ways in which creationists could be talking about out of order. The first way is that's just them being dumb and saying, why are there still monkeys? Or if humans evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Except about other things, right? So you hear them say sometimes like, well, if birds are found with dinosaurs, then how could birds have evolved from dinosaurs? It's because you don't know how evolution works, right? Birds are one group of dinosaurs who evolved among a whole bunch of other dinosaurs in the Jurassic. And so the birds and the non-avian dinosaurs persisted through like the middle Jurassic, the late Jurassic, the early Cretaceous, and the late Cretaceous. There's no middle Cretaceous. Sorry about that. So like, we would expect that. It's also like, oh, if one-toed horses evolved from three-toed horses, then sometimes we can see three-toed horses living alongside one-toed horses. Same answer. Literally the same answer, right? So that's the first way that in which creationists try to point out like out-of-place fossils. The only other thing that they ever find are basically them ignoring the fact that reworking occurs. So an easy way to think about reworking, in fact, a way that sometimes has come up in paleoanthropology, is just burial. For $4.99, Kent, the bacteria kind Halston, oh no. says Kent Hovine's brain is whatever that dog evolved into. The idea of Kent's brain actually just being a tumorous mass of dog cells. I mean, it would explain a lot, to be fair. Such a gross image. I'm now just picturing a bunch of like cancerous cells instead of a brain that are all just somehow dog cells for some reason, but also still managing to mimic the functions of a brainstem to keep him alive. Ugh. That's some body horror stuff right there. I lost my train of thought. What was I talking about, Ben? Help me out.
Oh, that was too long ago for me to remember.
Oh, right, reworking. Okay, reworking. So, imagine you wanted to bury someone. Your friend or family member has unfortunately passed away, and you're part of a culture that generally disposes of the dead by burying. And so you were in a place where the soil is relatively shallow and relatively compact, but you still want to give a good burial. So you dig through the relatively shallow topsoil and you hit some rock. But it's not hugely hard rock, and you have tools that are harder than this rock. You can burrow through it without too much trouble. So you do. You dig up a hole, and it goes into some rock, and then you place your friend or family member in that grave that you just dug, and you fill it back in. So when someone comes along, millions of years later, say, they're going to find your friend much lower in the stratigraphic column than that friend actually lived in, right? Because maybe you burrowed into some 50 million year old rock, right? Like maybe there was some relatively soft limestone down there. Okay, cool. Well, will an or paleoanthropologist or paleontologist or whatever, 3 million years in the future, think that your friend lived the 53 million years ago that layer would be now? Or are they going to know that it was reworking? Well, one of the things is, Ben, have you ever dug a hole?
Yes, I have.
Were you careful to fill the hole back in with the stuff that you dug out in reverse order so that the dirt that you put back in was put back into where it originally was?
No.
Nope. People usually aren't, because why would you care?
Yeah.
Well,
I wouldn't.
if you were a geologist, do you think you could notice that this out-of-place body is actually also surrounded by out-of-place sediment?
I would think so.
They sure can. And so that's called reworking. Now, it doesn't just happen as a result of intentional burial, right? Like there could be an earthquake, which opens up a fissure, which means that sometimes higher sediment will fall into the fissure, and then the fissure will reseal, and then lithification can occur again, resulting in parts of the rock from younger ages being stuck down in a crevice in older ages. And this is what generally creationists are talking about when they're talking about things that are found too early. It's usually just reworked sediments. The thing is, geologists can tell when things are reworked because it won't have the same composition as the matrix around it, which means something happened, right? If you're digging through a limestone layer and then you get to a bunch of like broken up sandstone in just one little wedge, something happened, obviously. And so because scientists can actually figure this out, they don't really worry too much about reworking. They just note it when it happens and continue on. And that's basically the only other kind of quote-unquote out-of-place fossil that creationists ever talk about is reworked sediments, right? So, like, if there's another option, if there's another example, I haven't seen it in the creationist literature, and I check, and no creationist that I've seen in a video has brought one up and then cited what they were talking about and had it actually be a genuinely out-of-place organism. Another thing they'll do is just not know when things evolved, right? So they'll say, well, if mammals evolved in the Miocene, then why are there Jurassic beavers? Which first, there aren't, and second, because mammals evolved in the Jurassic, not the Miocene. I don't know what to tell you. No one has ever said that mammals evolved in the Miocene besides Stephen Meyer. It's one of the stupidest things he ever said. So, like, unless Kent has some counterexamples, that is what happened. That is the explanation for this.
A reversal. A huge section of land the size of Washington State flipped over. Oh.
I don't know of any section that's that big has flipped over, but yeah, that also happens, right? And we can tell. We actually talked about this a bit earlier, right? There are ways that you can tell which way is up in a sediment, even if that's not the same way that's up now for you. So For instance, if you are looking and there are actually, what is it? Dinosaur National Monument, I think, has a trackway that's basically vertical rather than horizontal. Now, you're not the biggest land animal to ever live, but you're significantly above average when it comes to land vertebrates in terms of size, right?
Okay.
Have you ever been able to walk unsupported across a wall?
Across a wall?
Yeah.
No.
No. If you were to try, do you think you would probably just fall?
I think I would fall right
Yeah.
away.
So if you saw embedded in rock, it's vertical, footprints going in sideways, do you think that those animals made those footprints sideways? Or do you think maybe the strata has changed position?
I feel like the strata must have changed position.
Okay. And this is just based on your everyday experience of, walking
And how gravity works.
and how gravity works, right?
For the most
So,
part.
what if instead the footprints were actually going up? Have you ever walked across a ceiling?
No, I have not.
So that would probably tell you once again that the direction of up has changed in these rocks from when they were first laid down. Yeah. Geologists can do this, right? There are other options, right? Like raindrops only fall on the top of sediment. So if you find preserved raindrops, you know which way is up and which way is down. Similarly, with stromatolites, you can also tell. Stromatolites have a characteristic direction that their arcs go. So if you cut open a rock and there's a stromatolite that you've cut through, you can use the stromatolite to tell which way is up. In fact, that has happened with the Paluxy footprints. Because the muddy beach that the Paluxy footprints, and this is from Paluxy, Texas, that some creationists say, well, there were human footprints too. The muddy beach actually had small stromatolites in it. And some of the prints go through these stromatolites, and we can see which direction the stromatolite was growing in. And in many of the cases of the so-called human prints that are just hoaxes, they're actually carved upside down. So the stromatolites are actually growing down into the print, which is impossible. That's not how stromatolites grow. They can't grow into the ground because they're photosynthetic and only the top layer is alive. So how could they grow down? They literally can't. It's physically impossible. Which means if you find upside down stromatolites, you know which way the rock was facing originally. And so by using these techniques, geologists can actually tell when these things have happened. It's not just, oh, well, the complex fossils were found lower, so I guess these are actually the younger layers, and something mysterious happened. No, there are actual hard scientific methods to determine which way is up in a strata. It's not just a guessing game.
Yeah, that happens all the time,
It actually does, right? You can go to a road cut and look at non-horizontal strata. And if strata can come in at vertical angles or steep slopes, they can also flip. And we know they do, because again, we can tell which way is up, even without having the fossils or vertebrates to use index fossils to figure out where this thing is stratigraphically. Another thing is paleosols, which are fossilized soils. But you've encountered plants, right?
I have seen plants before, yes.
Have you ever pulled a plant up down to the roots?
I have, yeah.
The roots generally grow up into the sky or down into the ground.
Into the ground.
So if you found a layer of fossilized soil, you could use the roots to tell you which way is down, because whichever way the roots grow on average should be down, right?
Correct.
Well, what do you know? Geologists do that too. The thing is, okay, so there's a lot of really technical stuff going on in geology, but when it comes down to a lot of it is just like, hey, how could this possibly have physically formed? And there usually aren't that many answers to that question that could possibly be true. And so that's what geologists go with. Like, it's not some arcane science that no one can ever understand. Geology is surprisingly straightforward in most cases. Younger stuff goes on top. Why? Because if it didn't start on top, then how could it fall below the ground, right? Like, you can just think about, like, with layers of snow. If you have snow one day, and then another snowstorm comes, the snow can't fall under the original snow. It has to go on top. Sediment works the same way. Okay, we got a couple things here. Kent the Bacteria Kind Halstead for $4.99 says, Young Earth creationism has more diagnostic characteristics of a cult than the Catholic Church does, which they call a cult. So if by cult we mean a destructive high control group, and not the historian version of this, which is just to say any kind of worship practice, then I would agree. Yeah. Yeah. Now, when they call the Catholic Church a cult, usually what they mean is a group of people whose tradition grows out of Christianity, but deviates, sorry, too far from what they would consider the essentials of Christianity. So that's another complex thing, right? Because Christians will call things a cult, not in the sense of a high control group, but just in the sense of like a thing that deviates too far from what they consider pure Christianity. Which is weird, because most of the people who do this, which is primarily Protestants, deviate considerably from anything anyone would have recognized as Christianity, say, 600 years ago. So it's a weird thing, and also, like, clearly, unless you were actually a Protestant, there's no reason to take seriously Protestantism as, like, the core of Christianity. They're not the majority of Christians. If you count them as a single group, they are larger than all the non-Catholic groups, like non-Roman Catholic groups. Well, okay, I don't want to say Roman Catholic, but all of the groups together that are in communion with the Roman Pope. But on the other hand, like, if you go like denomination by denomination, each of them is much smaller than, say, the Eastern Orthodox Church. So, yeah, it's a really weird thing that they center themselves that strongly. But anyway, Terrador's final form for 500 Argentinian pesos says, in Cal Urcu, Sucre, Bolivia, in Sucre, Bolivia, there's an 80-meter tall cliff wall full of dinosaur footprints, if anyone wants to check. Also, AIG is a bag of whoever keeps pulling the plug on the best Netflix shows. Seriously, I'm gonna take a drink. I'm still angry that they canceled the Dark Crystal TV show. To this day, whenever I think about that, it makes me angry. Yeah, so that's also really cool. I would like to look more into this Al Urku or footprint cliff. Sounds really sweet. All right, here we go.
For instance, the Matterhorn, the famous mountain in Switzerland, you know, that goes up like this and then it comes out and then goes back up. Makes it really tough to climb. The Matterhorn is reversed, where the older layers are on top of the younger layers.
Okay.
Chief Mountain, Montana, same way.
Okay, so this is not all that complicated, right? A local uplift event pushes some strata upside down, and then they just kind of sit there, and then they erode for a while, and it just so happens that some of the top higher layers that are now older because of the reversal are harder than some of the younger layers a little bit lower, which means those ones erode a little bit faster, which results in that sort of like shrinking and then growing, then shrinking back down again shape. That's it. That's the whole explanation here. It's not very complicated.
What they say are the oldest layers are on top of the youngest layers.
Okay.
I wonder, how did that happen?
Do you think Kent knows how mountains form?
He has no idea.
Okay.
He probably thinks mountains were created in place.
Well, this is very stupid, so I'm going to take a drink, and we're going to talk about orogenies. Now, while orogeny might sound like a technical term for something dirty, it's not. It's actually a mountain-forming event. That's an orogeny. So, there are two really big ways that orogenies happen. One is volcanoes. In a volcanic orogeny, magma wells up, pushing up the crust, forming magma chambers and whatnot. Volcanoes erupt, they produce sediment. Okay, cool. This usually results in a combination of igneous strata, as well as just the sort of sloping up of any underlying sedimentary strata. Okay. But the other big way is folding. Now, the most famous folded mountains are probably the Himalayas, but a lot of the European mountains are also folded mountains too. Not a lot of volcanoes in Europe. You didn't know that. There are some, right? But not a whole lot. And when folding occurs, the crust actually wrinkles and crumples up, and it can slide over itself, and parts that get slid over can tend to come vertical and then even go past vertical and reverse direction because they're folding. That's the entire way the mountain forms in the first place. So the only thing that we need to explain how this happens, how did that happen in the first place, is it's called an orogeny, where there's mountain folding. That's it. Folding strata, which we see happening right now in the Himalayas. You can watch it happen. it's relatively slow on a human timescale, but like it's currently ongoing. It's not a mystery. You're seeing it happen this very minute.
Of course, the evolutionist, undaunted, will say, well, there was an overthrust. You see, you got the oldest at the bottom and the youngest on top. Okay. And then the section of land broke and it slid up over the top.
Well, that's another option too, although that won't give you a continuous layer or a series of layers that go from youngest at the bottom to oldest at the top. What that will do is it will take a younger set of layers that are themselves going to be in order, but then shove them over older layers, which can also happen in one of these orogenies. Now, I don't actually know enough about the geology of the Matterhorn to know which of these events caused the apparent reversal in the order that Kent is talking about. So, like, I'm not going to say which one of these is, but both of these are pretty basic things. And you can actually, again, go to places like certain road cuts and look at overthrust faults, right? Where you can see the layers and how at one point they're divided in a sort of subvertical fashion, and some of them have been shoved up over other ones. Like, you can physically see it happen right where the fault is. Some of those are exposed in various places. You can just go look at it. And so Kent is basically just saying that things that we can just see, you can just look at it with your own eyes, just don't exist. It's like Kent's denying the reality of clouds. Right? Like, you can just go look. Right?
So we ended up with the oldest on top of the youngest. It's called an
Well, older and younger. These aren't likely to be the oldest ever rocks and the youngest ever rocks, but like, whatever. That's a minor nitpicky problem.
overthrust. Trouble is, this overthrust is like, I forget how many thousand square miles.
Oh, great, it crashed.
Don't you think if a few thousand square miles of the crust of the Earth was sliding over the other part, don't you think you'd be able to see some rubbing in between? Yeah.
That's always fun. So, Bet, which
What's
is your
that?
favorite episode besides Spock's Brain of TOS?
The City on the Edge of Forever.
Ugh, everyone says The City on the Edge of Forever.
You know why they say that, right?
It is really good, I get it.
It's very good.
Okay, but what about Balance of Terror?
That's also pretty good. But not as good as The City on the Edge of Forever.
All right. Well, is it because you think Edith Keeler is hot? Is that what the deal is?
You got it.
See, I know. Edith Keeler. It's all about Edith Keeler.
Busted.
Would you let her get killed in a car crash to prevent the rise of the Nazis? Or the win of the Nazis, I guess?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
I would make that sacrifice. It would be difficult, but it'd
Yeah.
be for the betterment of mankind.
Yeah, I mean, Edith Keeler, she yeah, preaching all that pacifism. As we all know, the actual message of Star Trek is that violence is actually the answer to most problems. Especially the problem of not having World War II get won by the wrong side. That's yep. Let's see where we were.
Squared up out of the sand. Water is not real compressible upon their intelligence. This fellow Niles Eldridge, who also believes in evolution, say are the oldest layers are on top of the youngest layers.
Hey, that's where we were. I will bring Bent back in just a second. I just have to screen share with him. So give me a second. How to find where the heck he is, actually. There he is. So let me share this video with you. And remember, that is not Adapter as a professional. Bent, can you see it?
Yes, I can.
All right. Why is your face not back? This is strange. Okay, we'll go with that. You're back now.
Yay.
Wonder how did that happen? Of course, the evolutionist, undaunted, will say, well, there was an overthrust. You see, you got the oldest at the bottom and the youngest on top. Okay. And then the section of land broke and it slid up over the top. So we ended up with the oldest.
Also, I want to point out, that's the kind of thing that can just happen after an earthquake. You know, the kind of thing that happens pretty much every day somewhere on Earth.
On top of the youngest. It's called an overthrust. Trouble is, this overthrust is like, I forget how many thousand square miles. But don't you think if a few thousand square miles of the crust of the Earth was sliding over the other part, don't you think you'd be able to see some rubbing in between? Yeah.
Who says you can't? This is the thing that creationists say a lot, and I think they just made it up. I honestly have no idea where they get this, other than just having made it up, right? And it's that they'll say that there's no marks of erosion or weathering between strata. But that's just not true. Like, at all. In fact, the very fact that strata usually have very, very flat and thin layer, like, margins, or not margins, what am I talking about? Boundaries, like transitioning from one stratum to the next. The fact that it is almost always very flat and very smooth is itself because of erosion most of the time. That's the reason for it. What would it look like if you saw erosion versus if you didn't? And I've never heard a creationist actually answer that question, right? Because let's say, you can kind of think of sedimentation as sort of like making a parfait, right? You ever make a parfait, Bent?
No, but I've eaten that.
Okay. Well, we're seeing a parfait.
Yes.
Okay. So normally when you make a parfait, right, you just kind of dump some stuff in. And then it forms some layers, but the layers are a little bit uneven and they're kind of squiggly and whatnot, right? Well, let's say we simulate erosion or weathering. Now, weathering always tends to smooth things down, right? The more jagged something is, generally the less weathered it is, as a general rule, right? That's why when you see weathered statues, things like the nose is one of the first things to go, and like the fingers and even the arms tend to go before, like, say, the eyes or the details of the torso, right? Because they stick out some. They're more jagged. Okay. So overall, weathering smooths things out. So let's say I make a parfait, but I'm going to simulate weathering on this parfait by just taking a knife and just kind of scraping the top of each layer, just right along there, and just discarding whatever I scrape off. That will result in smoother layer interfaces, right? Smoother, flatter layer interfaces. The very fact that smooth, flat layer interfaces are so common is itself evidence that most layers are in fact at least somewhat weathered before the next stratum is deposited. I don't know what Kent thinks isn't there that should be there. I don't know. Because he'll just say, well, there's no signs of erosion. But it's not true. Terrador's final form for 200 Argentinian pesos says, if the German Workers' Party didn't win World War II, then how do you explain the waves arms around everywhere? Well, it's called a resurgence, is how I would explain. Yep, it is in fact a resurgence of similar ideologies, right? And what that is one of the things. It is a similar ideology that is currently prevalent in places like the former United States. I am perfectly happy to use the name Nazi in those circumstances because in the important ways, Trump is a Nazi. The Republicans are Nazis now, by and large. But they're not Nazis in the same sense of actually having the exact same ideology as like the German Nazis. They don't, right? Like, they don't particularly think that the Germans are actually the descendants of Atlanteans. They actually have a much stronger pro-Christian stance than the Nazis ever did. Overall, the Nazis were actually pretty skeptical of Christianity, which is one of the reasons why a lot of the upper echelons of the leadership were in fact anti-Christians and not in fact in favor of Christians, although they were perfectly happy to manipulate church bodies to increase their power. But like, yeah, there are differences. So it's definitely not a direct continuation of the ideology that the Germans were using in World War II. There are definite discontinuities. But the important parts, because, like, quite frankly, I don't care that much if you think you're descended from Atlanteans. Like, whatever. Who cares? Not that important. But the important things are things like denying due process rights, strong ethnocentrism, ethno-nationalism. Those are the parts that are relevant, as far as I'm concerned, and that are concerning. But you don't actually have to get them from a direct line linking them back to, like, European fascism in, like, Italy or Spain or Germany. In fact, even in Germany, there's a lot of discontinuity between the Italian and Spanish fascism. It's sort of like the OG fascism. And then getting into the German stuff. Because a big part of the OG fascism was trying to assert claims to like the ancient Roman Empire, which, while a lot of Roman architectural cues were taken in the Third Reich, there was much less idea of like, we're going to restore the Roman Empire. Because instead, they were going to try to restore this fictional but mythical Teutonic kingdom that never really existed, but that they wanted to imagine existed. So even then, like, fascist movements tend not to have direct lines of just pure ideological continuity. That doesn't mean that they can't spring up. So, anyway, Kent the Bacteria Kind Halstead for $4.99 says, you really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell lies? Yes, Millhouse. I do think. Oh, no, that wasn't Millhouse. What was that, Arthur? But it wasn't actually Was it Arthur? I think it was Arthur. Was that Arthur?
Maybe.
You don't even know, do you?
Maybe.
All right. But yes, actually, I do think that someone would, in fact, do that. That is, in fact, a thing that people do. Anyway, I talked way too much about fascism today. I don't like talking about fascism. Let's not talk about fascism for the rest of this show, the next 20 minutes or so.
It would break up, obviously. The friction would be enormous, okay? And
a lot of overthrusting does involve breaking of the rock. But, like, the fact that it's not broken where you're currently looking doesn't mean that there was no breakage. I don't know what to tell you, right? Like, I just don't even know what to say to that other than that. It was Buster, apparently. But it was in the show, Arthur, right? Buster Rabbit said that. Okay. Ugh, man. Kids shows, I can't remember any. The only kids show I ever watched was Power Rangers and the 90s X-Men cartoon. Those are the only kid shows I ever watched. And Darkwing Duck, I suppose. And DuckTales. And Rescue Ranger.
Is that all?
Gargoyles. Watched Gargoyles.
I didn't watch that.
It had Marina Sirtis in it, you know.
I don't even remember it being on TV. Like, I don't know what time it was on.
Oh. I'm trying to think if I watched what else I watched. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Those were definitely among the shows that I watched, though.
it would create a section of rock called breccia. Just
I think it's breccia, but who cares?
crunched rock, you know. Slide a chunk of concrete over another chunk of concrete. Just drag it with a tractor just a few feet and see what happens, okay? And here this thing supposedly slid like 100 miles and left no evidence.
Okay, but Kent, do that same thing with that same chunk of concrete, but at a speed of like 2 millimeters a year. I bet you could keep that chunk of concrete together a lot better that way.
This is just flat dreaming, but...
Okay, then what do you do when you can actually see the fault line, Kent? Because that's the thing. Remember, we can find the fault lines where there's the actual direct discontinuity, where you can see the rocks that have slid up and the rocks that were used to be contiguous with them that didn't slide up. What's his explanation for this? Because this isn't just something that we make up, right? Like, we can see it happening in real time and also look at places where we can actually see the fault line. Kent just ignores that, which is incredibly dumb, and I'm taking it. Jonathan Frakes did great voice acting in Gargoyles. Yeah, look, it was basically a TNG reunion.
Nice.
Actually, I was watching Boston Legal the other day, and there was an episode, like pretty much all of them have Rene Auberjonois, who played Odo, right? Because he's a main character. Well, he's a major character. But that same episode also had like, they also all have like William Shatner, because he's a main character. But then also Quark and Neelix showed up too, and I was like, how many Star Trek actors are we going to shove into this episode? So yeah, I also always like it when they do a little Star Trek reference. Like at one point, William Shatner's character Denny's cell phone rings, and it's the Star Trek communicator beep. I appreciate it.
The name and age of the layer is determined by the fossils it contains.
That is not generally true. What actually happens is that index fossils are used as a rough guide to the position in the stratigraphic column that you're working in. But the actual ages, in terms of number of years, is not determined that way. Index fossil dating can only give you relative dates, right? Because it's a stratigraphic technique. You're saying, okay, I know I'm in this strata, and this strata comes below or above this other stratum. So that way I know roughly where I am in the stratigraphic column. Now, nowadays, because the stratigraphic column has been so carefully dated with absolute dating methods, that's enough for you to actually get a pretty good absolute date. But you can't, that date is not actually directly derived from the stratigraphic dating. It's actually derived from radiometric dating. So the reason that we can say that, like, the Maastrichtian stage of the end Cretaceous ended 66 million years ago is not because of the fossils we find in it, but rather because of the radiometric dating that we've done to the various layers around it. Because generally you can't directly radiometrically date sedimentary layers, but because igneous layers are relatively common and they can be radiometrically dated, you radiometrically date those, and there you go. So when Ken says that the age is determined by the fossils, he's just wrong. The stratigraphic position can be determined by the fossils, but the age is actually determined by radiometric dating. And only the relative ages are useful with fossils by saying, okay, this is older than that, but not by how much, right? So, for instance, if you came... So you know how sometimes snow will fall, and then there's a little bit of a thaw, and the top layer of the snow melts, but then it freezes again, you get a little layer of ice? Suppose you came to a wintry place. You're in, like, I don't know, Canada, because it's pretty much always snowy there. I just imagine that Canada is basically Hoth from Star Wars, right? Like, if you're left outside for more than a few hours, you're just going to die. And the only way to survive is by cutting open a large animal and hiding inside of its corpse. So that's my mental image of all of Canada. Don't at me about the fact that, oh no, Canada has nice parts. I don't care. That's my mental image of Canada. We're just sticking with it. So imagine you're in Canada. You've been just airdropped into Canada. And you're going to dig a little path through the snow to get to the log cabin that you're going to be staying in. Because you're in, like, the rural Yukon or something. I don't know. And so you dig through this and you notice that there are 3 layers of this, like, snow with an ice cap on top of it. Okay. So could you tell which snowfall happened first, second, and third? Well, yeah, obviously, right? You could say that the bottom layer with the bottom ice cap, that's the oldest snow, clearly. Then the next layer is the middle snow that fell, and then the top layer is the last snow that fell. Okay, cool. How long ago did that snow fall? I don't know. I would have to check, like, historical records of, like, when was the last time the snow fell? When was the last warm weather that could have melted it? Like, that's how you would check that. But if all you have is, well, we've got these layers, you know which one came first, second, and third, but you don't know how old they are, other than that this one is older than that one. That could have been from 3 weeks ago that the first layer fell. It could have been from 2 days ago. You just don't know. And that's what we can get with just index fossils. In order to actually get the firm dates with numbers and units, we have to use something else. And we do.
This fellow, Niles Eldredge, who also believes in evolution, said,
Yes, Eldredge, of Eldredge and Gould, the guys who came up with punctuated equilibrium, they do in fact, or did in fact, believe evolution.
this poses something of a problem. If we date the rocks by the fossils, how can we then turn around and talk about patterns of evolutionary change through time in the fossils?
Hey, Bent.
So,
What punctuation mark ends that final sentence other than the quotation mark that Kent has added in?
well, there's a period, and then on the next paragraph, there's a question mark and quotation mark.
Okay, so Kent put the quotation mark in. So what punctuation did Eldredge end with?
With a question mark,
Want to guess why?
because he was asking a question.
And then, since this is a whole essay, what do you think he then went on to do?
He probably went on to answer that question.
That's exactly what he did, because I've read this essay.
Is that a Trojan source then?
Yeah, actually it is. I happen to know that this is in fact a Trojan source, because Niles Eldredge goes on to show you why that actually isn't what's going on. This is specifically Niles Eldredge writing about the fact that if you don't know much about geology, the dating methods of geology using stratigraphy can look circular, even though they're not. It's literally the entire point of this. So Kent is telling a lie here. it might not be his lie, right? He might have gotten this from another creation. Like, he gets pretty much everything. But this is a lie. When you say Niles Eldridge realized that, oh, the fossil record is circularly dated. No, he didn't. And we know for a fact because that is an essay you can go read, and he answers his own question. This is the exact same technique as, like, quoting the first line of an abstract of a paper, and saying, see, we don't have any clue, even though the first line of an abstract is to set up the problem you're going to answer in the paper. Roshna hashtag upset Keller for $4.99 says, I'm a bit behind on the stream, but my fave episode of Star Trek is Blink. Get out. You get out of here. Although I will say, Blink is an amazing bit of TV. It might be one of my favorite speculative fiction episodes of pretty much anything. It was the first episode of Doctor Who I saw. It's the reason I ever watched Doctor Who in the first place. And after I watched it, this was back when Facebook was still actually relatively popular, and I actually used it. And the first thing I did after I saw it was I put out a Facebook update to say, like, hey, drop whatever you're doing right now and go watch Blink.
I remember that.
Yeah. I was like,
and I watched it the next day because I was actually coming up to it. I just happened to be in the same spot you were a couple days behind.
I have like no notes on Blink. It's basically perfect, which is weird because it barely even features the Doctor in it. He's almost not in it at all, and it's a Martha episode. Not a Martha. What's her name? The tenant companion that only lasted one season. What was her name?
That's Martha.
It was Martha? Yeah, it is Martha. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Martha. Sorry.
Yeah.
I really like Martha. I wish she was there for more than a season. I thought she was great.
Yeah.
I was sad when they wrote her off. So. Oh well. And not just because she's hot, which she is. But anyway. The Bacteria Kind Halstead says, I swear to Sobek, if I have to hear the name Stephen Jay Gould one more time, I will drink orange juice after brushing my teeth. Oh, gross. That's... Okay, no. You have to drink orange juice after brushing your teeth and drink it out of a steel container.
That's harsh.
It's really harsh. You know why that happens, right?
Because of electricity?
Well, kind of. Like, the acidity actually pulls iron ions off of the thing. It's ridiculous. You're basically just drinking an iron solution.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really gross. It's not that far off from battery acid. I mean, obviously it's way more vile than battery acid, but it's the same basic idea. Terrador's final form for 200 Argentinian pesos says, Kent is like someone who bought their arguments from Ian the Seer. Oh, that reminds me of one of my favorite XKCD cartoons, which is just a few of my favorite things, like the song from The Sound of Music, except it's about I've been bamboozled by Ian the Seer. Yeah, it's like raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens. Bright copper kettles leave flakes on my mittens. I've been bamboozled by... Wait, sorry. This is just stone with a copper veneer. I've been bamboozled by Ian. Which, like, imagine if you like, ran a shady business, and then 2,000 years later, people living in a society that you can't even comprehend were roasting you in a medium that you couldn't even imagine. Like, imagine if, like, 2,000 years from now, the kids are posting in, like, the hyperdimensional pan net about you speaking, like, post-English, and they're transmitting this through, like, subspace or something, just to roast you in particular. Like, what a legacy. What a legacy.
See, the rocks are dated by the fossils, and the fossils, of course, are dated by the rock layers.
Not really.
We've been through that before, and that's simply silly. Okay.
It would be, but I've already explained it, so we're not going to go more.
Moving water will automatically separate particles based upon their density, based upon a lot of different factors.
Yeah, this is called hydrodynamic sorting. It is a real thing. The problem is that the rocks aren't hydrodynamically sorted. So one easy example is you've been to the Grand Canyon.
Yes, I have.
Are you aware that there are 2 different limestone layers in the Grand Canyon?
I did not know that.
There's the Red Wall and the Kaibab limestones. Did you know that between them are a bunch of other types of rocks, including sandstone?
I'm not surprised.
Did you know that hydrodynamically, sand always settles out before limey muck does? Or lime particles do?
Interesting.
Yeah. So how do you go from lime to sand to lime if it's hydrodynamically sorted?
Magic.
Well, there's a few options. One is magic. The other one is you have to wait for the lime to solidify, or at least to settle out, or you can drop
like
more
that
sand on it.
option.
Yeah. But,
Yeah.
but if you have to wait, that means that these
means
layers represent time.
It takes a lot of time, yeah.
Weird. It's almost like hydrodynamic sorting can't explain the fossil record coming from a single flood because the rocks of the earth aren't hydrodynamically sorted.
The textbooks often say clams are found at the bottom of the so-called geologic column because
And no, they're not. Bottom of the geologic column is in like the Hadean, when there was basically no life. Then we start getting the first stromatolites. It's not until well into like the very end of the Cambrian, going into the next few time periods, that we even get bivalves at all, never mind actual clams. In fact, in the Cambrian, the closest thing we have to a bivalve is basically what looks like a slug, but with two bivalve shells at either end, which is probably the actual ancestral form of bivalves before that middle bit started to shrink up and the two shells came together. So we actually have non-bivalve, stem bivalve mollusks as a transitional species. They're not in my transitional species slideshow, if I remember correctly, because I couldn't find some great fossil pictures of them. But like, we have them. That's a real thing that you can find in the Cambrian layers of the Earth. And they're lower than any actual true bivalves. So I'm just going to take a drink for how wrong Kent is getting all of this. All right, but with that, it is time to start wrapping things up. Bent, do you have anything coming up that you want people to know about?
I don't have anything coming up, no.
Nothing?
Not a single thing.
Not even the rising portions of convection cells that might be going on?
Nope.
You know about convection cells.
Heard about them.
As long as you know what they are.
Yeah.
All right, well, what's coming up here on this channel? Let's see. So on Wednesday, Thursday, I know my days of the week. On Thursday, Homo Insanus with Dr. Brian Thomas. That is going to be the final episode of the Brian Thomas Talking About Human Evolution series. Look, if you've seen the first two episodes, then you know what you're in for, generally speaking. It's really bad. I'll just put it that way. It's really, really bad. Then that's going to be at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Then on Friday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, we are playing Star Trek Endurance. The Star Trek Endurance stream is going to feature me, Chesh, Jordan from Reason to Doubt. It's going to have Maddie from Science Side Up / OK Roll. It's going to have Craig from Craig McNeil / FTFE. It's going to have Zeralon. It's going to have Tirirana, Necro, assuming everyone can make it, which I don't know, maybe someone won't. Haven't had a full team for the last two episodes, but that's okay. You saw the teaser trailer for it, so you know there's going to be a plague. We got to solve the plague before the Klingons get a little bit too shooty. So, or maybe we won't. I'm okay with them failing. It can happen. Then on Saturday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be having Dapper Reacts, assuming that I don't get any messages about delaying it and then ask and then get it delayed. If that happens, it will be a delay time. But we will be back to Bodhi Hodge and his big book of bad ideas. Yeah, it's about the Tower of Babel. It's the big book of bad Babel ideas. It's really, really dumb. And every single time, Kip really struggles not to curse a lot. Which is, I try to keep my streams about PG-13. So yeah, that'll be on Saturday. Then on Tuesday, we are back to Kent with Bent. And I don't think, Bent, that you're going to have to worry about having the tutu on unless we get a bunch of $100 super chats here in the next couple minutes. So, you know.
That's okay, I guess.
Yeah, you'll just have an unitchy neck.
Yeah.
Because in order for it to show up on camera, we had to put it around his neck. Because if it were around his waist, it just wouldn't be there.
Yeah, we tried that. It didn't work out.
No, it didn't.
No one can see it. What's the point?
Yeah. Borg Emporia, who's been a member for 20 months and is at the amulet level, says, after the stream, check out FTFE live stream. Go 7 of 12. Dapper, feel free to explain who 7 of 12 is, and could you say resistance is futile in Klingon? So, first I'll do the first part. 7 of 12 is our Klingon ex-Borg security officer on the USS Kongzi, played by Craig McNeil. He is a rather aggressive individual who is a bit of a shoot first kind of guy. He has been he's not been in trouble, but like he can be a bit gruff. So, you know. Let's see. Can you say resistance is futile in Klingon? Let's see. So it's a weird phrase because Klingon does not like to take verbs and just directly turn them into nouns. So like let's see. So we'd probably go with like resist, which is om, and then we'd probably do a sentence as object. So like let's see. Futile or is basically pay. But then we can't use sentence as object because then it would have to be the subject. We probably just have to use two sentences. So assuming that you're talking about multiple people, probably end up saying om pay as two different sentences. Resist, or I guess you just say pay. It's futile as two different sentences. Om pay as two separate sentences would probably be the way that I would express that. My Unfinished Sock for $2 says, don't spew word salad, like and share instead. And yes, please do like and share. It really does help. But with that, I think it is time to close this down. Bent, you are safe from the tutu, but you never know. Next week we might get another tutu. We might get a tutu. Possible.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Guys, if you are interested and you are, up and awake, we are going to be watching 4 episodes of Power Rangers Ninja Steel over on the Discord server for supporters. Please come and hang out with us for that. I think it's going to be fun. I don't know. Yeah. And Vishanti says, Ohm is resist. Yeah, no, that's an intentional joke. The fact that Ohm matches the unit of resistance is in fact an intentional joke from Mark Okrand. A rather large portion of the Klingon lexicon is in fact a bunch of jokes by Mark Okrand. So, yeah. Yep. In fact, there's a Klingon word for root beer specifically because Mark Okrand wanted to put an A and W pun in Klingon from the very beginning. Literally the only reason there's a Klingon word for root beer. So, yeah. All right.
What is the word?
Aujet.
Oh, nice.
Which J means and A and W is the how part, so it's A, W, and in Klingon, and comes at the end of a string of nouns rather than before the last one. So it's like A and W, Aujet.
I like it.
All right, we're going to get out of here and head over to the Discord in just a few minutes. So I hope you all stay safe out there. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I hope that I see all of you on Thursday for the premiere. Bye, everybody. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovend, Ferrevara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Max Cherry, North Texas Fossils, John Ackerman, Strawberry Vein, Dr. Tapioca Weasel, Elleron Teller, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostek von Mennen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Sphincter of Doom, and Volus. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.